So the idea is that speech is built upon four primary pillars that form the foundation of speech. And the idea is this is how we get from breath to communication. There is a flow through the body that speech takes, and it begins ultimately with the breath. And the breath is born of the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a cup-shaped muscle that sits on the bottom of the rib cage. So we have this lovely person here who is busy breathing for us. And the diaphragm is this muscle down here at the bottom of the rib cage. And the bottom of the rib cage, if you look, the rib cage doesn't move really during respiration, right? The rib cage is a rigid body. It is not meant to move. So what I would ask you to do for a moment is I'd ask you to do this. That looks salacious. Anyway, let's keep going. If you kiss, pay attention to what happens in your mouth when you do that. Pay attention to what happens to your cheeks, your tongue, your chin, your jaw, and your lips. So, what is happening inside of your mouth? Well, the jaw drops, right? And the tongue pulls down. And when that happens, if you don't let any air into your lips, the sides of your cheeks suck in. And what's happening is you're increasing the amount of volume inside your oral cavity without letting any air in to fill that vacuum. So when you increase the volume and you don't make any room, it creates suction, right? That's why the sides of your cheeks go in. And if you create a little gap in your lips, the air rushes in to fill that vacuum, that volume of space you've created that nothing is in, and you get the kissing sound. Happens when your jaw drops, your tongue drops, and you create that space. The rib cage is like this. It's all of this structure that you've opened. And when the diaphragm drops, right? When the diaphragm drops, then what happens is it creates a vacuum inside that rib cage that something has to fill. And what fills it are the lungs. The lungs expand into that space, right? And when they expand, all of these tiny little alveoli in the lungs, right, they expand as well, and they need something to fill them, just like your mouth. And so what happens is the diaphragm drops, the lungs get sucked into the rib cage, and air flows in through the nose. Because that's like your lips, right? That's the passage for air to enter the vacuum created in your lungs, and in it goes, right? When you exhale, the diaphragm pushes up, and it squeezes what is inside the rib cage, increases the pressure, which compresses the lungs, and it pushes the air out. And the air comes out. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more on Wednesday, but speech begins here at the breath. A muscle located below the rib cage, attached to it like the bottom of a bell. It contracts, pulls down to inhale, and it extends, it pushes up to exhale. After breath, we had to make some sound, right? And so phonation occurs, and phonation is the process of making sound, and it happens in the larynx, also called the voice box, right? So if you take your hand and put it here, unless you can make your Adam's apple disappear by making a high-pitched voice, we will save that for later, and you say, you're going to feel a little bony plate, middle of your windpipe, rise and fall. Rise and fall. That is your larynx. And your larynx is a cartilaginous box that protects your vocal cords. It also provides a structure for them to which they are attached. So if we want to look at the vocal cords, we want to look at the vocal folds. This is what it looks like. This is a cross section of your windpipe right here. And this is your larynx, that thing that you feel moving up and down in the throat, right? And right here is a gap. That little gap, those are your vocal cords. And your vocal cords, no, let's not look at that. Overhead, if we look at this, right?
E. Now, A as loud as you can. A.
Sorry for that loud noise. I apologize for that. The level was up high. These vocal cords right here, look at that. There they are. The vocal cords themselves, right there, are made of muscle, cartilage, nerves, and mucus. And they vibrate. They vibrate for reasons we're not still quite sure. I mean, we know what happens. There's nerve impulses that go to them, but there's also air flowing over them. And it seems to be a combined job of the airflow and the nerves that are making your vocal cords vibrate. And just like if you play a guitar and you have your hand all the way out on the end of the neck, it's a lower note than if you bring your finger all the way in and you're pushing down on a fret close to the body of the guitar. It's a higher note. The length of the freely vibrating portion of the vocal fold defines the pitch. So if it's a short length, it's a higher note. If it's a long length, blong, 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 bling, bling, blong, blong, bling. Long length of vocal cord, long string, lower note. And so they pinch off. They pinch off, and the free part that's vibrating essentially defines the pitch, the frequency. They're covered in mucus, and it is the mucus that makes it possible for the vocal folds to do what they do. If they vibrated together without the mucus, they would abrade one another. They'd get really irritated, which is why if you have a cold and you take cold medicine to dry out your vocal cords, right, because you're getting snot everywhere, you take a decongestant to dry up the snot, you're drying up the mucus here. It's why you're more likely to go hoarse faster if you have a cold, is usually the treatment. Also, coughing and clearing your throat will abrade the vocal cords. So, the vocal folds. Voice box. Vocal folds are made of muscle, cartilage, nerves, and mucus. That's the voice box. The vocal folds, they vibrate like guitar strings. And the sound is created by air flowing over the vocal folds. And the pitch is dependent upon the length of the vibrating cords. Now, after breath and phonation, we have articulation. And this is the one that we'll talk about, or you will talk about in your group session on Friday when you're talking about saying your name. Articulation uses all of the mechanisms of the jaw, head, throat, sinus, all of these mechanisms to shape sound. The sound that's coming from here, not a whole lot you can do with it. All you can do with your vocal folds is change pitch. Ha! Ha! And when you think about it, about 100,000, 200,000 years ago, first human beings, hey, we can vocalize. And, okay, so look, some berries. Well, if all they did was vocalize, and they found some berries, they might go, ah, 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 and everybody's going to go, oh, berries, ah, ah, and they're going to pick the berries. They're very happy they got berries. But then the horned, vicious antelope or whatever shows up and it wants the berries and it's going to fight somebody. Someone sees that. Well, what do? Ah! Ah! Well, it sounds maybe a little too similar. And so everybody comes rushing expecting to find berries, but they get gored by a horned antelope that's very angry. No wonder it took us so long to evolve. Anyway, so what is necessary is to take the vocal folds, which are great at expressing emotion, and use them so we can more specifically define what we're talking about. We need greater differentiation. The more things in the world that we need to define, the more we need to be able to differentiate them vocally when we identify them, right? And that's what articulators do. They shape phonation so that it creates context for the sounds that you're making. And there are multiples of these: the tongue, the teeth, the lips, the jaw, the epiglottis, all of these articulators, which are in the diagram that I'm sending you. The mechanisms of the mouth and the head that shape, restrict, or stop sound coming from the vocal cords. And the variations in articulation are defined by differences in shape and pressure when those mechanisms make contact. And then finally, the final pillar of speech is resonance. Now, resonance, well, it's like that guitar again, right? If you just pluck the strings, there's not a whole lot you're going to hear. But the body of the guitar, this hollow, rigid body, vibrates, right? It resonates with the frequency of the strings. It gives it the richness. A cello, which has an even larger hollow body, is a deeper, even richer sound, right? As opposed to a ukulele, which is plinkety, 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 or something like that. I don't think ukuleles really sound like that. But you get my point. And so a resonator is any hollow body in the speech mechanism that can vibrate with the sound of phonation. And we have several of these. We have the oral cavity, the sinus. We've got the pharynx, which is the open space in the back of the throat. All of these are resonators. They are the hollow bodies that vibrate with sound in the speech mechanism. They add depth and richness. And also, if you are tense, they will stop vibrating. And that's one of the reasons that relaxation in speech is so important. The moment we become tense, we will lock up sound. Relaxation means things can vibrate freely and move easily. And those are the 4 pillars of speech: breath, phonation, articulation, and resonance. See what you missed? I enjoyed talking to you. I will see you on Wednesday when we will explore breath, the first of the pillars of speech.